to them, 75% probability of a leave win.
The other major story tonight, the global aftershocks after that vote in Britain, and for so many around the world, a stunning result, deciding to leave the European Union.
The UK has voted to leave the European Union, a historic vote with very deep and long-lasting implications.
On June 23, 2016, a referendum for exiting the European Union was held in the UK, and the population voted 52 to 48 to leave. This decision to leave the European Union may result in significant economic issues, along with the UK dissolving, due to strong pro-Europe support in countries like Northern Ireland and Scotland. Leading up to this vote were months of campaigning on both sides. Pro-Europe politicians argued that the benefits of the EU and the possible economic ramifications of leaving it far outweigh the upside, while pro-Brexit politicians argued that Britain's increased self-determination and its regaining control of immigration outweighed the benefits of the EU and the possible economic problems that could follow it. The referendum held was just that, a referendum, and technically was not legally binding at all. Despite this, its effects were immediately evident. Instead of doing what he promised and enacting Article 50 of the EU's Lisbon Treaty, the pro-Europe Prime Minister David Cameron resigned and was replaced by a more right-leaning Eurosceptic, Theresa May. This was a sign of the shift in politics. The effects on the economy were even more clear. Immediately following the vote, the pound dropped more than 10%. The Financial Times Stock Exchange 100 Index, or the FTSE 100, dropped 8%, losing $170 billion worth of capital. And the FTSE 250, a larger index including more domestically based companies, dropped nearly 12%. Since the original drop, the markets have recovered substantially. The FTSE 100 regained all its losses after the Brexit vote, and before the week was over, it was up 3.53%. The FTSE 250 spiked back up 3.22%, but was still down 7.6% at the end of the week, and since then has fully recovered and hit record highs. These recoveries were made once investors realized that the UK was not going to enact Article 50 for months or even years to come. Many investors still worry that once the UK does enact said article, losses could be much more substantial and recovery would be less immediate. More significant than the short term are the potential long-term effects. These effects are almost entirely dependent on the negotiations between the EU and the UK and the final deal they come to. Before understanding the negotiations the UK has ahead of them, one must understand the complexities of the European Union and the other subgroups within it. The full members of the Union all pay membership fees, vote on common laws, and use a common currency. At least most of them do. In return for this, these countries are able to trade freely throughout the Union, and their citizens are able to travel freely throughout the EU, living and working in any country they choose. The EU has many groups within it, but the only one that is pertinent to the negotiations is the European Economic Area, or the EEA. EEA members still pay the same fees and must follow most laws made, but are not full members and therefore have no say in these laws. In return for this, members of the EEA get to live, travel, and trade freely throughout the Union, and are exempt from some laws, most notably those regarding fishing, farming, taxation, and foreign policy. The UK is not attempting to join the EEA, but many of its goals match up with the parameters of the group. In her letter to President Tusk, on March 29, 2017, Theresa May triggered the UK's 2-year process of enacting Article 50. In this letter, she laid out what the UK wants to achieve in their negotiations. The first few goals May laid out were ones more of etiquette and not of significant substance, asking to engage with each other constructively and peacefully, and to put their citizens first. Once she has passed these, May begins to get into the technicalities of the agreement. Her third principle is that they should work towards a comprehensive agreement. May goes into more detail in this, saying that it is necessary to address the terms of the UK's future partnership as they address the terms of its exit from the Union. This is a key issue for the UK, as they have significantly more power to negotiate their future relationship while still in the Union than they would if it was negotiated after their exit. May then says that they should work to minimize disruption and maximize certainty, addressing the issue of the investors and businesses in the UK and the EU's economies. May wishes to put in place implementation periods to make change more smooth. By doing this, she hopes to avoid any significant economic ramifications like those seen after the referendum was held. Her fifth principle addresses the issue of Northern Ireland. The border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland has been a hot spot for conflict in the past. May wishes to establish a common travel area between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland to avoid these conflicts sparking up again. The sixth principle proposed discusses trade. May proposes an ambitious free trade agreement between the UK and the EU. She goes on to point out that due to the existing regulatory frameworks between them, the groundwork is already present to be built upon. Her last principle states the UK's intention to continue to ensure that Europe remains strong and prosperous and able to lead the world, but makes no comment on actual policy. Although May's optimistic letter addresses most of the issues with leaving the EU, the UK's future is still quite uncertain. Over half of the UK's exports go to the EU, and if May's free trade agreement falls through, which it very well might as no other country has made an agreement like this before, tariffs would be placed on these exports. Along with this, 1 in 10 UK jobs are connected to the EU, and while not all of these would be affected by Brexit, many of them would. An example of this is Deutsche Bank. They estimated that up to 4,000 of their jobs in the UK may have to be moved to other EU countries, depending on the negotiations. Another economic loss for the UK is trade agreements. The UK benefits from many of the trade agreements made with the EU, and after exiting the Union, they will have to negotiate their own deals with significantly less influence than the EU has. Another potential effect of Brexit is the separation of the UK. The UK is made up of 4 different countries: England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. England makes up 84% of the population, and their 54.3% vote to leave, along with Wales' 52.5%, decided Brexit. England's huge sway over the vote leaves the other pro-Europe countries with a decision of independence. Scotland is the most likely candidate to declare independence. In 2014, a referendum for independence was held, and Scots voted to stay in the UK with only 55% of the vote. Ironically, a significant reason for this decision to stay was the European Union. The process for achieving membership to the EU is long and difficult, and as Scotland is a pro-Europe country, voting 62% to remain in the EU in the Brexit referendum, its citizens voted to stay in the UK and retain membership to the EU. Northern Ireland voted 55.8% to stay in the EU in the referendum, and since then, reunification parties already active in Ireland have made steps to hold a referendum on leaving the UK and joining the Republic of Ireland, which is already a member of the EU. The effects of Brexit are not only evident on the UK, but on the EU as well. Post-Brexit Europe Commission polls show that support for the EU has dropped in all but 2 member countries, and Euroscepticism is on a massive rise. A report by Capital Economics identified Germany, France, the Netherlands, Sweden, Austria as the most likely countries to exit the Union, with Germany at the top. In the last cycle in Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel's CDU party lost 2 parliamentary elections to the right-wing Eurosceptic Alternative for Germany party. In France, Marine Le Pen has pledged to push for a French referendum on exiting the EU. In the Netherlands, Geert Wilders pledged to make the EU membership a key issue in the next election cycle. In Holland, 88% of people polled said they would be in favor of holding a referendum. In Austria, politicians say that the country should have a referendum within a year. And in Sweden, MEP leader Peter Lundgren said that the country was already on the brink of quitting before Brexit even took place. Overall, the future is incredibly uncertain for both the UK and the EU, with the United Kingdom in the most jeopardy. Huge parts of the UK's economy and infrastructure are supported by the EU, and with independence movements throughout it, the political entity may come to an end entirely.